Welcome back to another journey through the vast cosmos of science fiction. Tonight, we're diving deep into the Mass Effect universe to explore one of the most fascinating and influential species in gaming history. The Asari, with their elegant appearance and millennium-long lifespans, have shaped galactic civilization for over 2,000 years. They were the first to discover the Citadel after the Protheans vanished. They proposed the very council that governs civilized space, and they've wielded more influence through diplomacy and culture than most species ever achieve through military might. But beneath that polished exterior of blue skin and graceful biotics lies a species built on secrets, contradictions, and a philosophy that measures success in centuries rather than years. So settle in as we unravel the story of the Asari, from the paradise world of Thessia to the rigid code of the Justicars, from their unmatched biotic prowess to the soft power that makes them the galaxy's most formidable diplomats. The Blue Daughters of Thessia. The first time Commander Shepard steps onto the Citadel, one thing becomes immediately clear. The Asari are everywhere. They're diplomats conducting negotiations in the Presidium. They're scientists examining Prothean artifacts. They're dancers entertaining crowds in Korra's den. They're commandos providing security for matriarchs. The sheer ubiquity of the Asari across galactic space speaks volumes about their integration into the fabric of modern civilization. When humanity stumbled onto the galactic stage in 2157, still reeling from the first contact war with the Turians, it was the Asari who extended the hand of friendship most readily. Not because humanity was particularly special, but because that's simply what the Asari do. They welcome new species into the fold, confident that given enough time, Asari values and perspectives will naturally permeate and influence these newcomers. The Asari are, by human standards, extraordinarily beautiful. Standing roughly human height, they possess distinctive blue to purple skin, though some rare individuals display teal complexions. Instead of hair, they have semi-flexible, cartilage-based scalp crests that form distinctive patterns. These crests are rigid structures, not the flexible tentacles some mistake them for. Many Asari bear unique facial markings, colored patterns that vary from individual to individual. Some resemble eyebrows, though the Asari themselves don't think of them that way. These markings are as individual as fingerprints, another layer of identity in a species already defined by its uniqueness. Their eyes, capable of seeing into the ultraviolet spectrum, hold an almost otherworldly quality, and their voices, universally perceived as feminine by human ears, carry a melodic quality that makes them natural communicators. But here's where things get interesting. The Asari are a monogendered species. They have no males, no concept of gender differences as understood by species like humans or Turians. When asked directly, Liara Tassoni, one of the most well-known Asari in the galaxy, explains it plainly. Male and female have no real meaning for the Asari. She's not precisely a woman, despite how others might categorize her. The Asari likely adopted feminine pronouns to simplify communication with other species, or perhaps the translations themselves are imperfect. Regardless, within their own culture, the distinctions that define so much of human society simply don't exist. Every Asari is fundamentally the same in this regard, which shapes their entire social structure in ways that species divided by gender can barely comprehend. What truly sets the Asari apart, what makes them simultaneously fascinating and formidable, is their lifespan. An Asari can live for over 1,000 years. To put that in perspective, Liara Tassoni is 106 years old when Shepard first meets her, and she's considered barely more than a child by her people's standards. Her mother, Matriarch Benezia, is estimated to be close to 1,000 years old, having reached the final stage of Asari life. Imagine having a perspective that spans 10 centuries. Imagine planning strategies that won't come to fruition for 300 years. Imagine watching civilizations rise and fall. Technologies evolve. Philosophies come into and go out of fashion. This longevity fundamentally alters how Asari perceive time, risk, and change. Where a human sees an urgent crisis demanding immediate action, an Asari might see a minor fluctuation in a pattern that's repeated itself a dozen times over the centuries. This long view isn't just a quirk of personality. It's baked into Asari culture at every level. When the Asari encounter a new species or situation, they're comfortable with extended periods of passive observation and study. They don't rush to judgment or immediate action. They watch, they learn, they wait. They're unfazed that investments or decisions might not pay off for decades or centuries. Matriarchs can make choices that seem incomprehensible to younger races, only for the brilliance of those carefully laid plans to become evident centuries later. In interstellar relations, this manifests as what political scientists might call soft power centrism. The Asari instinctively seek to maintain stable balances of economic, political, and military power across the galaxy, not through direct control, but through influence, not through force, but through the inevitability of their ideas spreading like ripples across a pond. And spread they have. The Asari possess the largest economy of all Milky Way species. Their economic power, combined with their diplomatic reputation, allows them to wield persuasive influence throughout civilized space. When an Asari speaks, people listen. When an Asari proposes a solution, it's taken seriously. When an Asari makes a prediction about the future, it's often wise to pay attention. They've positioned themselves as the mediators and centrists of the Citadel Council, the voice of reason and compromise in a galaxy that often threatens to tear itself apart through conflict. But this position wasn't achieved through accident or luck. It was built deliberately, methodically, over more than 2 millennia of careful maneuvering. The Paradise World, Thessia, and its secrets. To understand the Asari, you must first understand their home world. Thessia isn't just where the Asari evolved. It's the foundation upon which their entire civilization was built, and the secret it harbored shaped galactic history in ways that wouldn't be revealed until the darkest hour. Thessia is, by all accounts, a paradise, a temperate world rich with forests, rivers, lakes, and mountains. It resembles Earth in many ways. The atmospheric pressure and gravity are similar enough that human visitors like Commander Shepard can move about comfortably without special equipment. The climate is mild, the seasons gentle, the disasters infrequent. If you were designing an ideal world for intelligent life to evolve and thrive, you'd be hard-pressed to improve on Thessia. But Thessia has something Earth doesn't. Something that would prove both blessing and curse, advantage and secret shame. Element 0. The exotic matter that enables Mass Effect technology and biotic powers is absurdly abundant on Thessia. Not just present in small deposits that must be carefully mined, but saturated throughout the environment. It's everywhere, woven into the very fabric of the planet's ecosystem. The air itself seems to hum with biotic energy, a second atmosphere that permeates all living things. Every plant, every animal, every organism on Thessia has adapted to this constant exposure to EZO. And the Asari, as the planet's dominant intelligent species, have integrated it into their very being more completely than any other known race. This saturation of Element 0 had profound effects on Thessian evolution. All Asari are natural biotics from birth. Not some Asari, not most Asari, all of them. The ability to manipulate dark energy and create Mass Effect fields isn't a rare talent requiring special training and dangerous implants, as it is for humans. It's as natural to an Asari as breathing. Basic biotic training is a mandatory core part of public education on Thessia. School children learn to control their innate abilities the same way human children learn to read and write. It's simply a fundamental skill, taken for granted, assumed to be part of growing up. The idea that an Asari might lack biotic ability is almost inconceivable. Those rare individuals who do lack the talent are effectively excluded from military service, but such cases are vanishingly rare. The cities of Thessia reflect this abundance of natural resources and lack of existential threats. Unlike Tuchanka, the Krogan homeworld reduced to a radioactive wasteland by nuclear war, or the harsh military fortresses of Palaven, where Turians learn discipline through adversity. Thessia's settlements are elegant and refined. The architecture favors flowing lines and open spaces, integration with natural beauty rather than domination over it. The Asari never developed a single unified planetary government in the traditional sense. Instead, Thessia is divided into numerous city-states, each largely autonomous, each governed by its own councils and traditions. These republican cities, reminiscent of ancient Mediterranean city-states on Earth, cooperated and traded freely rather than competing for resources or waging wars of conquest. This decentralized structure worked because Asari culture naturally favors consensus and accommodation. Rather than hoard resources, they bartered freely. Rather than attack one another over differing philosophies, they sought to understand and find common ground. As information technology developed, the city-states grew even closer. What emerged was something unique, what political scientists might call an electronic democracy. The Asari have no politicians in the traditional sense, no elections with competing parties and campaign promises. Instead, they maintain a freewheeling, all-inclusive legislature that any citizen can participate in at will. Policy debates take place around the clock in official chat rooms and forums, moderated by specially programmed virtual intelligences. It's direct democracy on a planetary scale, made possible by the Asari's long lifespans, their cultural emphasis on consensus, and their comfort with patience and deliberation. But beneath this idyllic surface lay a secret that would shake the foundations of galactic society when it finally came to light. Hidden within the Temple of Athame, a structure several thousand years old located in the city of Ceres, was a Prothean beacon. Not a deactivated relic or a mysterious artifact of unknown purpose. A fully functional beacon containing a Prothean 6 named Vendetta, along with vast repositories of Prothean knowledge and technology. The beacon's existence was known only to a select group of matriarchs and their acolytes. These beacon matriarchs, as they came to be known, kept its existence a closely guarded secret in direct violation of Citadel Council law. They studied it, decoded its information, and used the insights gained to accelerate research and development across the Asari republics for their entire spacefaring history. This wasn't just a minor ethical lapse. It was a fundamental deception about the source of Asari technological advancement. The Asari had long been admired for achieving spaceflight and advanced technology on their own merit, for being naturally gifted in ways other races could only envy. But the truth was more complicated. The Protheans had observed primitive Asari civilization 50,000 years ago and decided they showed promise. The Protheans genetically altered the Asari to grant them enhanced biotic capabilities, beyond even what Thessia's element zero saturation had provided naturally. They defended Thessia from an asteroid strike by a species called the Aurivores, an event that became mythologized in Asari religion as the goddess Athame wielding her sword against jealous gods. And when the Reapers came for the Protheans, those desperate scientists left behind the beacon, a gift and a curse that would elevate the Asari beyond other races while simultaneously making their achievements a lie. The revelation of the beacon came during the Reaper War in 2186, when Thessia could no longer be defended, and Counselor Tivos, in consultation with the beacon matriarchs, decided their only hope was to reveal the secret and pray the beacon's information could help complete the Crucible superweapon. Commander Shepard, accompanied by Liara and potentially the Prothean warrior Javik if he'd been revived, traveled to the temple to extract the beacon's data. The mission was a disaster. Not only did Cerberus agent Kai Lang steal the VI, but the revelation itself shattered illusions that had defined Asari identity for millennia. If you've brought Javik along on that mission, his commentary is devastating. He confirms what the evidence suggests. The Protheans uplifted the Asari, cultivating them as the next cycle's best hope against the Reapers. The Asari's vaunted technological achievements weren't purely their own. They'd had help, an advantage no other species enjoyed, and they'd kept it secret for thousands of years. For Liara, the discovery is deeply personal. Her entire academic career was built on studying the Protheans, yet her own people had been hiding the most significant Prothean artifact in known space. Her mother, Matriarch Benezia, likely knew about it. The temple she'd visited as a child, the sacred site of Athame worship, was built around this concealed beacon. Everything she thought she understood about her people's history suddenly required reevaluation. The Asari hadn't simply been lucky or naturally gifted. They'd been chosen, uplifted, given advantages that made their dominance of galactic civilization somewhat inevitable. And now, with Thessia burning under Reaper assault, with refugee fleets fleeing the homeworld and countless lives being lost, the price of that deception was being paid in full. Born of biotic energy, the Asari connection to dark energy. If you asked 100 people to name the Asari's most defining characteristic, most would say they're biotics, and they wouldn't be wrong. The Asari's relationship with biotic power goes far beyond simply having useful abilities. It's woven into their biology, their culture, their methods of reproduction, and their very identity as a species. To understand the Asari is to understand how Element Zero shaped them in ways both obvious and subtle. Biotics, for those unfamiliar with the term, refers to the ability of certain individuals to manipulate dark energy and create mass effect fields through electrical impulses from the brain. This produces various psychokinetic effects like telekinesis, barriers, and gravitational manipulation. For most species, becoming a biotic requires exposure to Element Zero during fetal development, followed by years of training and the surgical implantation of amplifiers around the age of puberty. Even then, only about 1 in 10 ESO-exposed human infants will develop biotic talents strong and stable enough to merit training, and those abilities aren't always permanent. For the Asari, none of these limitations apply. Every single Asari is born biotic. Their nervous systems naturally produce the electrical impulses needed to generate mass effect fields. Their physiology grants them conscious neural control from birth, something other species must painstakingly learn. They don't require implants to use biotics effectively. Their reproductive biology, that mysterious process called melding that we'll discuss more in a moment, handles all of this naturally. An Asari child learns to lift objects with her mind the same way a human child learns to throw a ball. It's intuitive, natural, and completely taken for granted within Asari society. The level of control and power that Asari display with their biotics is extraordinary. While a human with an L2 implant might spike to impressive levels at the cost of debilitating migraines and neurological damage, and most modern humans use safer L3 implants that are considerably weaker, Asari naturally achieve power levels comparable to the strongest human biotics without any of the drawbacks. Lieutenant Caden Alenko's abilities, which are considered exceptionally strong for a human with his dangerous L2 implants, are reportedly comparable to an average trained Asaris. And that's the average. Elite Asari commandos and ancient matriarchs with centuries of practice can reach levels of biotic power that dwarf what most species ever achieve. Training in biotics begins in childhood for the Asari. Every community has schools where young Asari learn to channel and control their innate abilities. The training is comprehensive, covering everything from basic object manipulation to advanced combat techniques, from precise surgical applications to devastating area effects. Those who show particular aptitude and interest in martial applications may pursue the path of the huntress, dedicating years or even decades to mastering combat biotics. The most talented among these become commandos, warriors whose biotic abilities are refined to such a degree that they're considered among the finest individual combatants in the galaxy. A popular saying among Turians goes, "The Asari are the finest warriors in the galaxy." Fortunately, there are not many of them. It's said with a mixture of respect and relief. But biotics aren't just about combat for the Asari. They're integrated into daily life in ways outsiders might not immediately recognize. An Asari scientist might use delicate biotic manipulation to work with dangerous substances without physical contact. An Asari artist might create sculptures by shaping materials with mass effect fields. An Asari medic might use biotics to stabilize a patient's injuries. The applications are as varied as imagination allows, limited only by skill and creativity. This ubiquity of biotic abilities shapes Asari culture in subtle ways. Problems that other species solve with tools or technology, the Asari might address with biotics. Challenges that require specialized equipment elsewhere might be handled with a moment's concentration and a flicker of dark energy. The Asari's biotic abilities also connect directly to their most unique biological feature, their method of reproduction. The Asari reproduce through a process called melding, also referred to as the embrace eternity. During melding, an Asari attunes her nervous system to that of another individual, creating a profound neural connection. This isn't sexual in the traditional sense, though it's often accompanied by intimate physical contact and is described as intensely pleasurable. The Asari partner doesn't need genetic material from the other individual. Instead, the meld creates a sort of neural map of the partner's genetic traits and psychological characteristics, which the Asari then uses as a template to randomize her own genes when conceiving. The resulting offspring is always Asari, always female by outside standards, but carries genetic and behavioral influences from the non-Asari parent. This extraordinary reproductive flexibility allowed the Asari to mate with any species they encountered, from humans to Turians to Hanar to Krogan. The offspring gains what the Asari believe are the best qualities of the father, though evidence for this is largely anecdotal. What's certain is that Asari actively encourage mating outside their own species. Since they achieved spaceflight and encountered other races, Asari culture has strongly frowned upon Asari mating with each other. Such unions are considered wasteful because, according to Asari philosophy, nothing new is gained. The genetic diversity, the cultural insights, the psychological traits that come from cross-species unions are seen as essential to Asari advancement. Children born from two Asari parents are referred to as purebloods, a term that's considered a serious insult in contemporary Asari society. There's a grim reason for this stigma beyond mere philosophy. A rare genetic condition called Ardat Yakshi occurs much more frequently among the daughters of purebloods. Ardat Yakshi, which translates roughly to demon of the night winds, is a terrifying disorder. Those afflicted destroy their partner's mind during melding, killing them and gaining a rush of addictive pleasure from the process. It turns melding, the most intimate act in Asari biology, into a lethal compulsion. Ardat Yakshi who refuse to live in carefully monitored monasteries become serial killers, highly intelligent predators who leave a trail of destroyed minds in their wake. Samara's daughter Morinth is perhaps the most infamous example, having killed countless victims across centuries before Shepard and Samara finally tracked her down. The connection between purebloods and Ardat Yakshi is imperfect. Many pureblood children are perfectly healthy, but the statistical increase is significant enough to reinforce the cultural prohibition against Asari reproduction. The element zero saturation on Thessia also influenced Asari evolution in less obvious ways. The constant exposure didn't just grant biotic abilities, it shaped their neurology, their cellular structure, their very metabolism. Asari possess a robust cellular regenerative system that, while not allowing them to heal faster than other species, contributes to their extraordinary longevity. They can live over 1,000 years, a lifespan rivaled only by the Krogan, and they show remarkable resistance to degenerative diseases. Their blood is purple, a result of chemical compounds optimized for carrying oxygen in an isosaturated environment. They can see into the ultraviolet spectrum, perceiving colors and patterns invisible to humans. In a very real sense, the Asari are as much children of Element Zero as they are of Thessia itself. The exotic matter that enables faster-than-light travel and kinetic barriers didn't just give them tools. It rewrote their biology at the most fundamental level. The 3 stages: maiden, matron, and matriarch. Every Asari's life follows a pattern that's remained consistent for as long as Asari history has been recorded. 3 distinct stages, each lasting centuries, each marked by powerful biological and psychological changes. These stages shape not just individual Asari, but their entire culture, their philosophy, and their approach to the galaxy. Understanding them is essential to understanding why the Asari behave the way they do, why they think the way they think, and why their society functions so differently from most others in known space. The stages are maiden, matron, and matriarch, and they roughly correspond to what some scholars have identified as the triple goddess archetype found in various human mythologies. Maiden is youth and exploration. Matron is motherhood and family. Matriarch is wisdom and community leadership. But these simple descriptions don't capture the complexity and depth of what each stage truly means. The maiden stage begins at birth and typically lasts for the first few hundred years of an Asari's life. Some transition earlier, others later, the biological shift responding as much to psychological readiness as physical maturity. Maidens are driven by wanderlust, by curiosity, by an almost compulsive need to experience everything the galaxy has to offer. They want to explore new worlds, meet new species, learn new skills, test their limits, and discover who they truly are. It's a time of extraordinary freedom and equally extraordinary restlessness. Asari maidens travel widely, taking jobs as mercenaries, scientists, entertainers, commandos, traders, or any of 1,000 other professions. They're not running from anything, they're running toward everything, hungry for experience in all its forms. Liara Tassoni exemplifies the maiden stage, though in some ways she's atypical. At 106 years old when Shepard first meets her, she's relatively young even by maiden standards. Where many maidens pursue physical thrills and social connections, Liara dedicated herself to academic research, becoming one of the galaxy's foremost experts on the Protheans. She spent years alone on remote digs, piecing together fragments of a vanished civilization, while most of her peers were sampling every cocktail on Omega or signing on with mercenary bands. Her mother, Matriarch Benezia, worried about this scholarly isolation, this lack of the broad life experience that most maidens accumulate. As events unfold and Liara joins Shepard's crew, she begins to understand what she'd been missing. The maiden stage isn't just about gathering knowledge, it's about gathering experience, the messy, unpredictable, often dangerous experience that can't be found in any archive. Many Asari commandos are in their maiden stage. The typical Asari huntress has devoted 20 to 30 years to studying martial arts, but she might continue active service for a century or more. These warriors possess profound tactical insight, a hunter's eye, and a dancer's grace and alacrity refined by decades of practice. They fight individually or in pairs, employing guerrilla tactics that emphasize ambush, infiltration, and assassination. A single Asari commando can be practically unbeatable in one-on-one combat. Their combination of biotic power, weapons training, and sheer accumulated experience makes them formidable opponents. The Turian saying about Asari warriors isn't hyperbole. They genuinely are among the finest individual combatants in the galaxy. It's just that there aren't very many of them compared to, say, the Turian military's millions of soldiers. But not all maidens follow the warrior's path. Some become scientists, like Liara. Others become artists, entrepreneurs, diplomats, explorers, or entertainers. The exotic dancers seen in various bars and clubs across the galaxy, many are Asari maidens, using their natural grace and the mystique their species enjoys among other races to make a comfortable living. The Asari are fully aware that other species find them attractive, and they're generally comfortable expressing their sexuality without shame or hesitation. There's no judgment in Asari culture for a maiden who chooses to dance. It's simply another experience, another way to explore the galaxy and one's place in it. Young males of species like humans and Turians often develop a fascination with Asari, something the Asari find amusing rather than concerning. As Kaden Alenko once noted, the mere sight of matriarch Benezia in a pinstriped suit
sounds like something from an extranet fetish site. The transition to the matron stage typically occurs somewhere around an Asari's 300th to 400th year, though as with the maiden stage, there's considerable individual variation. Some Asari enter the matron stage earlier if they meld frequently. Others remain in a prolonged maiden stage if they avoid melding. The shift is as much psychological as biological, a growing desire to settle, to build something lasting, to create rather than merely experience. Matrons are driven by a powerful urge to raise families, to pass on what they've learned, to invest in the future rather than live entirely in the present. The restlessness of the maiden stage fades, replaced by a different kind of fulfillment. Matrons still work, still contribute to society, but their priorities shift. Where a maiden might join a mercenary company for excitement and credits, a matron who pursues a military career is more likely to take a leadership or training role, passing on decades of hard-won experience to the next generation. A matron scientist might focus on long-term research projects that a maiden would find too constraining. A matron entrepreneur might build lasting business empires rather than chase quick profits. And of course, many matrons devote significant time to raising their children. Though Asari parenting looks quite different from what humans might expect. Asari children mature slowly, and a matron might spend 50 years or more actively raising a daughter before that daughter begins her own maiden wanderings. Interestingly, Asari cultural norms don't force these life choices. While each stage comes with strong biological tendencies, individuals make unexpected decisions all the time. There are maidens who stay close to home rather than explore. There are matrons who would rather continue their work than build a family. Some Asari choose not to have children at all. And while this is less common, it's not stigmatized. The stages describe general patterns,
strong pulls that most Asari feel. But Asari philosophy emphasizes individual choice and self-determination. You follow your path, not the path others expect of you. This flexibility prevents the stages from becoming rigid social castes, though they do create certain expectations and assumptions that can be hard to navigate. The final stage, matriarch, begins around the 700th year, or earlier if an Asari melds rarely. By this point, an Asari has lived longer than most other species' entire civilizations. She's seen empires rise and fall. She's watched technological paradigm shifts come and go. She's accumulated such a vast wealth of experience and knowledge that her very presence commands respect. Matriarchs become active in their communities as sages and counselors, dispensing wisdom earned through centuries of observation. Their knowledge and guidance are so valued that matriarchs are rarely seen outside Asari space. They're too important, too valuable to risk in the dangerous regions beyond the Republic's borders. When a matriarch does travel to places like Ilium or even outside Asari space entirely as Benezia did, it's noteworthy enough that people pay attention. Matriarchs hold tremendous social and political power within Asari society. They serve on councils, lead communities, guide policy debates, and make decisions that will shape the republics for decades or centuries to come. When a matriarch speaks, people listen with a deference that goes beyond mere politeness. Her words carry the weight of centuries. Her judgments are informed by patterns that younger Asari can't yet perceive. Matriarchs can seem to make incomprehensible decisions, choices that appear foolish or short-sighted to younger races. Then, decades or centuries later, the carefully laid plans come to fruition, and everyone realizes the matriarch knew exactly what she was doing. This is the long view made manifest, the culmination of a millennium of accumulated wisdom applied to problems that operate on timeframes other species can barely conceptualize. But being a matriarch isn't just about wielding power. It's about responsibility. Matriarchs are expected to use their wisdom for the good of their communities, to guide without dominating, to share what they've learned freely. The average Asari might live 800 to 1,000 years, with some matriarchs possibly reaching even older ages. By the time an Asari reaches the end of her natural lifespan, she's witnessed so much change and accumulated so much knowledge that her death represents a genuine loss to Asari civilization. This is why Asari take the protection of their matriarchs seriously, why they're reluctant to risk these elders unnecessarily, and why the loss of Thessia to the Reapers was so devastating. It wasn't just lives lost. It was centuries of accumulated wisdom destroyed, irreplaceable perspectives extinguished, knowledge that would take generations to relearn. Warriors of elegance, Asari commandos and military doctrine. For all their reputation as diplomats and philosophers, the Asari are also warriors, exceptional ones. The disconnect often confuses people from more militaristic species like the Turians or Krogan. How can a race so devoted to art, culture, and peaceful negotiation produce some of the most feared individual combatants in the galaxy? How can the same species that founded the Citadel Council and has served as its mediator for millennia also field special forces operators so skilled that they were among the first individuals ever chosen as specters? The answer lies in understanding that the Asari don't view combat and culture as opposing forces. For them, martial excellence is simply another form of mastery, another art to be perfected through dedication and practice. The Asari military doesn't resemble what most species would recognize as a formal armed force. There's no national military structure, no unified chain of command stretching from a supreme commander down to individual soldiers. Instead, the Asari military resembles a collection of tribal warrior bands. Each community, each city-state, organizes its own unit as the locals see fit. They elect leaders to command them. They determine their own tactics, training regimens, and operational procedures. Units from populous cities might be large and well-equipped, with access to the best technology and weapons the republics can produce. Units from small farming villages might be only a handful of warriors with basic small arms. There's no uniform either. Asari warriors wear what they like, though practical considerations and tradition tend towards certain common elements. But don't mistake this decentralized structure for chaos or inefficiency. The Asari military is not an irregular militia. Those who serve are full-time professionals who have dedicated their lives to martial excellence. The average Asari huntress, as they're often called, is in the maiden stage of her life and has devoted 20 to 30 years to studying combat arts. Consider what that means. By the time a human soldier reaches 20 years of service and is considered a grizzled veteran, an Asari commando is barely getting started. She might serve actively for another century, continuously honing her skills, accumulating experience, refining her techniques. The sheer depth of knowledge and capability that comes from this extended service period is staggering. A 200-year-old Asari commando has forgotten more about combat than most species' best soldiers will ever learn. Asari warriors choose their path young and pursue it with singular dedication. From the moment an Asari decides to become a huntress, her education focuses on sharpening mind and body for that sole purpose. She studies tactics, strategy, weapons, hand-to-hand combat, and most importantly, combat biotics. The biotic abilities that all Asari possess naturally are refined through decades of practice into weapons of frightening effectiveness. A trained Asari commando can throw enemies across a battlefield with biotic force. She can create barriers that deflect incoming fire. She can lift multiple opponents simultaneously, leaving them helpless and exposed. She can warp the mass of enemy armor, weakening it to the point where a single shot shatters what should have been protection. And she can do all of this while moving with a grace that makes combat look like choreographed dance. The Asari approach to warfare emphasizes quality over quantity, individual excellence over mass formations. They favor small unit tactics, guerrilla operations, and special forces methodologies. An Asari commando team typically operates in pairs or small groups, using stealth, surprise, and overwhelming local superiority to achieve their objectives. They excel at infiltration, assassination, reconnaissance, and surgical strikes. Drop an Asari commando team behind enemy lines with a specific target, and that target will likely cease to exist with minimal collateral damage and maximum efficiency. But ask that same team to hold a position against massed infantry assault, and you'll quickly discover the limitations of their approach. The Asari simply don't have the numbers or the doctrine for conventional warfare on a large scale. This creates an interesting dynamic in galactic military thinking. The Turians, with their massive standing armies and rigid hierarchies, represent one extreme. Every Turian serves in the military, their entire society organized around martial discipline and coordinated large-scale operations. They can field millions of soldiers, coordinate complex multi-theater campaigns, and sustain prolonged conventional warfare. The Asari represent the opposite extreme. Their military consists of relatively small numbers of extraordinarily skilled individuals who excel in situations where conventional forces would be either inefficient or impossible to deploy. Neither approach is inherently superior. They're simply optimized for different scenarios. The selection process for the most elite Asari warriors is as demanding as you'd expect. To become an Asari commando, one of the absolute best of an already exceptional warrior culture, requires extraordinary natural talent refined through relentless training. These are the Asari who don't just master combat, they transcend it. Asari commandos were among the first individuals ever chosen to become specters, the Council's elite agents who operate beyond legal restraint in service of galactic stability. This wasn't favoritism or species bias. It was recognition that Asari commandos possessed exactly the combination of skills, judgment, and capability that the Spectre program required. Individual excellence, tactical flexibility, the ability to operate independently for extended periods, the wisdom to know when violence is necessary and when it isn't. Shiala, one of Matriarch Benezia's most loyal followers, exemplifies the Asari commando ideal. Even while serving a corrupted cause, she's a trained commando who spent decades perfecting her craft before entering Benezia's service. When Benezia falls under Sovereign's indoctrination, Shiala follows her matriarch with absolute loyalty, even knowing something is wrong, even sensing the wrongness of their actions. This loyalty, this willingness to follow a respected leader even into darkness, speaks to the intense bonds that can form between Asari, particularly between matriarchs and their followers. After Shepard defeats Benezia on Noveria and Shiala is freed from indoctrination, she chooses to dedicate herself to helping the Thorian-infected colonists on Pharos, using her abilities to bridge the connection between their altered minds. It's redemption through service, a very Asari approach to atonement. The Asari also maintain what might be called strategic special forces at the Republican level. These units, while still relatively small by other species standards, are equipped with the finest weapons and technology the Asari can produce. They serve as rapid response forces, deployed when situations exceed local capacity or require coordination across multiple city-states. During the Reaper War, these elite units fought desperately to defend Thessia, inflicting heavy casualties on Reaper forces despite being hopelessly outnumbered. The fact that Thessia eventually fell speaks more to the overwhelming power of the Reapers than to any failure of Asari military capability. No conventional force in the galaxy, no matter how skilled, could stand indefinitely against an enemy that could drop capital ships directly onto population centers and deploy endless hordes of husks and brutes. Asari warriors also serve as mercenaries throughout the galaxy, particularly during their maiden years. The galaxy's three major mercenary organizations, the Eclipse, Blood Pack, and Blue Suns, all employ Asari operatives, though Eclipse is particularly associated with them. These mercenaries bring their training and centuries of experience to whoever can afford their services, which are typically quite expensive. An experienced Asari commando can command premium rates because clients know they're getting someone who can handle situations that would require an entire squad of soldiers from other species. The trade-off, of course, is that you're getting one person, however skilled, rather than a team. For certain operations, that's perfect. For others, numbers matter more than individual capability. One aspect of Asari military culture that often surprises outsiders is their lack of concern for conventional military assets. The Asari Navy, while equipped with advanced technology and crewed by competent personnel, is relatively small. They maintain enough dreadnoughts and cruisers to defend their space and contribute to council operations, but they don't pursue fleet superiority the way the Turians do. They don't need to. The Asari defense strategy relies on diplomacy first, economic leverage second, and military force third. By the time a situation degenerates to the point where fleet actions are necessary, the Asari have usually already achieved their objectives through other means. And if military force does become necessary, they're comfortable allowing their allies, particularly the Turians, to provide the bulk of conventional forces, while Asari specialists handle the precision work. This division of labor within the Citadel Council works remarkably well under normal circumstances. The Turians provide the military muscle, maintaining fleets and armies that can respond to conventional threats. The Solarians provide intelligence, using their STG operatives and surveillance networks to identify problems before they escalate. And the Asari provide the diplomatic framework that keeps everyone working together, the economic incentives that make cooperation profitable, and the special operations capability for situations requiring surgical precision. Each species contributes what it does best, creating a system greater than the sum of its parts. It's only when facing something like the Reapers, an existential threat that overwhelms all conventional capabilities simultaneously, that the weaknesses of this approach become apparent. The Asari attitude toward their warriors is also worth noting. While they respect martial excellence and honor those who choose the huntress path, Asari culture doesn't glorify warfare the way some species do. Combat is a necessary skill, an art form worth perfecting,
But it's not the highest calling or the ultimate expression of Asari potential. A matriarch who spent her maiden years as a commando and then transitions to scholarship or leadership isn't abandoning something noble for something lesser. She's simply moving to the next stage of her development, applying the discipline and focus she learned in combat to new challenges. This cultural flexibility allows Asari to be exceptional warriors without becoming a warrior culture, to maintain deadly military capability without letting martial values dominate their entire society. The Code Absolute, Justicars and their unwavering path. Among the Asari, there exists an order so dedicated to justice that they embody it absolutely. So committed to their code that they will die rather than violate it. So respected and feared that even other Asari give them wide berth. These are the Justicars, warrior priestesses who have surrendered every personal desire in service of a set of principles so rigid that compromise becomes literally impossible. To understand the Justicars is to confront questions about the nature of justice itself, about whether absolute adherence to law can coexist with mercy, and about what happens when an irresistible force of pure principle collides with the messy complexity of reality. The Justicar order has existed for at least 5,000 years, possibly longer. Its origins trace back to a time when the Asari city-states, despite their general cooperation, still experienced significant crime and exploitation. Criminals could flee from one city-state to another, exploiting jurisdictional boundaries to evade justice. Corrupt officials could operate with impunity as long as they maintained enough political protection. The wealthy and powerful could commit atrocities and escape consequences through influence and resources. The traditional legal system, bound by territorial jurisdiction and subject to political pressure, proved inadequate for certain classes of criminal. Something more was needed. Something that could pursue criminals across borders, that answered to no government, that couldn't be bought or intimidated or swayed by political considerations. The Justicars were the answer. These warrior monks swear to uphold a code of absolute justice, pledging to pursue criminals who escape conventional law enforcement no matter where they flee or how long it takes. And the Asari republics, recognizing the necessity of such an institution, granted Justicars extraordinary legal authority. A Justicar has the right to pursue her prey anywhere in Asari space. She can cross any border, enter any territory, override any local authority. She has the legal right to kill anyone who interferes with her mission, even if that interference is well-intentioned or legally sanctioned by local law. She is effectively beyond law herself, answerable only to the code she swore to uphold. This code, formally known as the 5,000 Sutras, governs every aspect of a Justicar's existence. It's not just a set of laws or guidelines. It's a complete philosophical framework that addresses every conceivable situation a Justicar might encounter. There are sutras covering how to conduct investigations, how to determine guilt, when killing is justified, how to treat civilians, what constitutes interfering with a Justicar's mission, how to interact with other law enforcement, when to show mercy, when mercy is forbidden. The sutras anticipate centuries of edge cases and moral dilemmas,
providing guidance that allows a Justicar to make decisions with absolute confidence that she's acting justly, according to principles refined over millennia. Learning the code requires years of study. Prospective Justicars must memorize all 5,000 sutras, understand their interpretations, and internalize the philosophy underlying them. But memorization isn't enough. The code must become so deeply ingrained that following it becomes instinctive, automatic, as natural as breathing. A Justicar doesn't pause to consider whether her actions align with the code. She simply acts, and her actions are necessarily aligned because she has become a living embodiment of those principles. This level of commitment requires a fundamental restructuring of identity, a surrender of self so complete that the person who swore the Justicar oath barely resembles the person who existed before. The oath itself is binding and irrevocable. Once an Asari swears to become a Justicar, she can never return to her former life. She severs all personal ties. She abandons her family, her friends, her possessions, her home. Everything that defined her previous existence is forfeit. From that moment forward, she has no personal desires, no individual ambitions, no private life. She exists solely to uphold the code and pursue those who violate it. The only way to leave the order is through death, and even that must come while serving the code. A Justicar who dies peacefully of old age has failed because it means she wasn't actively pursuing justice at the moment of her death. Samara is perhaps the most famous Justicar in recent galactic history, and her story perfectly illustrates both the power and the terrible cost of absolute commitment to justice. Samara became a Justicar roughly 400 years before meeting Commander Shepard, driven by a tragedy so profound it shattered her previous life completely. She had been a typical matron, raising 3 daughters with apparent success, but all 3 daughters were revealed to be Ardat Yakshi, carriers of the genetic disorder that turns melding into murder. 2 of her daughters, Rila and Valeri, chose to enter the monastery at Lysus, accepting a life of isolation and careful monitoring to protect others from their condition. The 3rd daughter, Morinth, refused. She fled, beginning a centuries-long killing spree that would claim hundreds or possibly thousands of victims. Morinth was brilliant, charismatic, and utterly without conscience or remorse. She seduced victims across the galaxy, melded with them, burned out their minds, and moved on to the next kill. She cultivated an image as a sophisticated artist and socialite, using her considerable charm and centuries of experience to blend into high society wherever she went. And Samara, horrified by what her daughter had become and tormented by guilt over having brought such a monster into existence, swore the Justicar oath to hunt Morinth down. For 4 centuries, Samara pursued her daughter across the galaxy. 400 years of following cold trails, arriving too late to save victims, watching Morinth slip away again and again. 400 years of sacrifice, of never seeing her other daughters, of never stopping or resting or allowing herself even a moment of peace. The hunt consumed Samara's entire matriarch stage, the time when most Asari would be serving their communities as sages and counselors. But Samara's service took a different form, a grim and lonely form that allowed no room for anything beyond the mission. When Shepard first encounters Samara, she's tracked Morinth to Omega, but has been delayed by circumstances. She's been imprisoned by corrupt Eclipse mercenaries who don't care about her legal authority and see her only as a dangerous threat. After Shepard arranges her release, Samara agrees to join the Normandy's crew in exchange for Shepard's help catching Morinth. The arrangement benefits both parties. Shepard gains an extraordinarily capable ally. Samara gains resources and assistance she couldn't obtain alone. But the relationship is defined by the code at every turn. Samara makes it clear that her oath takes precedence over everything, including loyalty to Shepard. If the code requires her to act against Shepard's interests, she will do so without hesitation. The third oath of the code becomes particularly relevant during Samara's loyalty mission. The third oath states that a Justicar sworn to a mission must commit suicide rather than allow herself to be stopped from fulfilling it. When circumstances arise that would prevent Samara from continuing her hunt for Morinth, the code doesn't give her the option of finding another way or waiting for a better opportunity. It requires immediate death. Shepard can intervene, can find a solution that satisfies both the oath and the practical situation. But the incident demonstrates how rigid and unforgiving the code truly is. There's no flexibility, no room for interpretation, no allowance for extenuating circumstances. The code is absolute, and those who swear to uphold it must follow it absolutely, even to their own destruction. The confrontation with Morinth, when it finally comes, is everything Samara has worked toward for 4 centuries. She's tracked her daughter to Omega, to a specific apartment where Morinth lures victims. With Shepard's help, Samara finally has the opportunity to end the hunt that has defined her entire existence as a Justicar. But there's a complication. Morinth is powerful, possibly more powerful than Samara, after centuries of killing and absorbing her victims' neural energy. In a direct confrontation, victory isn't assured, and Morinth, who has survived this long by being clever and adaptable, has one final card to play. She tries to turn Shepard against her mother, to convince the commander that she's the reasonable one, that her mother's obsession is unjust. The player can actually side with Morinth, though doing so requires actively choosing evil. Morinth will kill Samara if given the opportunity, and she'll join Shepard's crew wearing her mother's face, pretending to be Samara, while secretly planning to kill Shepard eventually through melding. It's a choice that the game presents, but clearly doesn't endorse. The righteous path, the one consistent with Shepard's character in most playthroughs, is to help Samara finally end her hunt. When Morinth dies, Samara doesn't celebrate. She doesn't express relief that the centuries-long nightmare is over. She simply acknowledges that justice has been served, that her duty is fulfilled, and that she can now dedicate herself to whatever the code requires next. If Shepard earns Samara's loyalty, the Justicars' gratitude manifests in unexpected ways. Despite her oath requiring absolute dedication to the code above all personal relationships, Samara develops what might be called friendship with Shepard. It's constrained by her oaths, certainly. She can't place that friendship above justice, can't let personal affection compromise her duties. But within the boundaries the code allows, she shows genuine warmth and respect. She'll fight beside Shepard against the collectors. She'll offer wisdom when asked. She'll even share her thoughts on art, beauty, and the experiences that still touch her despite her oaths. It's a reminder that becoming a Justicar doesn't erase the person underneath. It merely channels everything that person is toward a singular purpose. In Mass Effect 3, if Samara survived the Collector Base mission, Shepard can encounter her again at the monastery on Lessus. The situation is grim. Reapers have attacked the monastery, converting some of its inhabitants into husks. Samara has returned to ensure her two other daughters, Rilla and Falere, are safe, but complications arise. The monastery is compromised. The Ardat Yakshi housed there are either dead or turned into husks, and the code, that absolute guide that has governed Samara's every action for 4 centuries, demands something unthinkable. It requires that she kill the last surviving Ardat Yakshi to prevent them from being captured by Reapers and turned into weapons. That includes Rilla and Falere, her own daughters, the children she sacrificed everything to protect by hunting Morinth. The moment is devastating. Samara has spent 400 years pursuing justice, following the code without question, accepting every sacrifice it demanded. She killed Morinth, her own daughter, because the code required it. She abandoned her other daughters for centuries, never seeing them, never speaking to them, because the code demanded absolute dedication to her hunt. And now, at the moment when she might finally reunite with Rilla and Falere, the code demands she kill them too. It's too much. Even Samara, who has embodied absolute commitment to principle for 4 centuries, cannot do it. Rather than violate the code by refusing, she chooses to invoke the 3rd oath, attempting to take her own life rather than face the impossible choice. Shepard can intervene, finding a solution that preserves both the code's demands and Samara's daughters' lives. Rilla is already dying from injuries sustained during the Reaper attack, fulfilling the code's requirement for her death without Samara having to kill her directly. Falere can remain at the monastery, which technically satisfies the requirement that the site be destroyed and its inhabitants eliminated, since Valair is now the sole keeper of a dead facility rather than a functioning monastery resident. It's technically compliant, a creative interpretation that maintains the code's intent while preserving life. Samara accepts this, though you can see the weight of it all crushing her. She's not grateful exactly. She's simply too exhausted, too emotionally devastated to feel much of anything beyond a distant acknowledgement that this outcome is better than the alternative. The Justicar Order represents something profound in Asari culture. It's an acknowledgement that sometimes principles must supersede personal desires, that justice requires dedication beyond what most can sustain, and that society needs individuals willing to sacrifice everything for ideals. But it's also a critique of absolutism, a demonstration of how rigid adherence to principle can create impossible situations where even the most just code demands injustice. Samara's story asks uncomfortable questions. Is a code that requires you to kill your own children truly just? Is dedication that allows no room for mercy truly virtuous? Can absolute law coexist with compassion, or does one inevitably destroy the other? The Asari themselves seem ambivalent about the Justicars. They respect them, certainly. They recognize the necessity of the order and grant its members extraordinary legal authority. But they also fear them, and many Asari are relieved that Justicars are relatively rare. Only a handful exist at any given time, perhaps a few dozen across the entire Asari republics. Most Asari will never encounter a Justicar directly, and that's probably for the best. Because when a Justicar arrives, it means justice is coming. Absolute and uncompromising, ready to sweep away everything in its path. And while justice is admirable in principle, its absolute form is terrifying in practice. Soft power and diplomatic mastery. Military prowess and individual excellence are impressive, but they're not what made the Asari the most influential species in Citadel space. That distinction comes from something less visible, but far more pervasive: their mastery of soft power and their centuries-spanning approach to diplomacy. The Asari don't conquer through force. They don't even particularly try to convert others to their way of thinking through overt persuasion. Instead, they create conditions where their influence naturally spreads, where their perspectives become the default assumptions of galactic politics, where their economic interests align with everyone else's prosperity. It's domination through integration, control through making themselves indispensable, power expressed through the ability to shape consensus. The foundation of Asari galactic influence was laid approximately 2,500 years ago when they discovered the Citadel. This massive space station, a relic of the Protheans, though the Asari didn't know it at the time, represented a quantum leap beyond anything the Asari had built themselves. It could house millions of inhabitants. Its mass relays provided instant travel across the galaxy. Its technology was advanced beyond the Asari's ability to replicate. Most importantly, it was situated at a crucial junction in the relay network, making it the ideal center for galactic trade and communication. The Asari could have kept the Citadel for themselves, restricted access, hoarded its advantages. Instead, they made a characteristically Asari decision. They opened it to all species, positioning themselves as the gracious hosts of galactic civilization. This wasn't altruism, though the Asari probably believed it was at the time. It was brilliant strategic thinking, whether conscious or instinctive. By opening the Citadel and positioning themselves as its first inhabitants and primary administrators, the Asari ensured that the station would become the center of galactic politics, with Asari perspectives, Asari values, and Asari cultural norms as the default framework. Every species that came to the Citadel would do so on terms the Asari had helped establish. Every negotiation would use protocols the Asari had shaped. Every agreement would reference precedents the Asari had set. The station itself became an extension of Asari soft power, a physical manifestation of their preference for consensus and accommodation. Shortly after discovering the Citadel, the Asari encountered the Solarians. This first contact could have gone poorly. The Solarians were technologically advanced, intellectually brilliant, and had their own ideas about how galactic civilization should function. But the Asari's approach to first contact emphasized understanding before action, patience before pressure. They studied the Solarians, learned their values and communication styles, and established relationships based on mutual benefit rather than competition. When formal diplomatic relations began, both species recognized they had complementary strengths. The Asari brought long-term strategic thinking and diplomatic finesse. The Solarians brought rapid innovation and intelligence capabilities. Together, they could accomplish more than either could alone. This partnership led to the formation of the Citadel Council in 500 BCE by Earth's calendar. The council would govern Citadel space, mediate disputes, coordinate responses to common threats, and generally serve as the closest thing to a galactic government. It was structured around consensus rather than majority rule, ensuring that no species could be steamrolled by others. And from the beginning, the Asari positioned themselves as the centrist voice, the mediators between competing interests, the species that could find common ground when others saw only conflict. This role suited Asari psychology perfectly. Their long lives gave them patience for extended negotiations. Their lack of internal gender divisions meant they approached many issues without the biases that complicated other species' politics. And their genuine belief in consensus and accommodation made them seem trustworthy, even to those who might otherwise be suspicious. The relationship between the Asari and Turians, established much later, exemplifies how Asari diplomacy operates. The Turians joined the Citadel Council in 1200 CE, after proving themselves in the Krogan rebellions. They were militaristic, hierarchical, and culturally very different from both Asari and Solarians. The potential for conflict was substantial, particularly between the Asari's preference for individual freedom and the Turian emphasis on collective discipline.
But the Asari approached the relationship pragmatically. They recognized that the Turians filled a crucial role, providing military capability that neither Asari nor Solarians wanted to develop themselves. Rather than competing with or resenting Turian military dominance, the Asari embraced it, positioning themselves as the diplomatic counterweight to Turian force. This created a functional division of labor within the council that persists to the present. The Turians provide military power and handle situations requiring conventional force. The Solarians provide intelligence and handle situations requiring subtlety and information. The Asari provide diplomacy, economic incentives, and handle situations requiring patience and persuasion. Each species contributes what it does best, and the system generally works because no species can fully dominate the others. The Turians have the biggest fleet, but they need Asari economic support and Solarian intelligence. The Asari have the biggest economy, but they need Turian military protection and Solarian technical innovation. The Solarians have the best intelligence services, but they need Asari diplomatic cover and Turian enforcement capability. It's mutual dependence disguised as partnership, and the Asari's role in establishing this balance was crucial. Asari economic power deserves particular attention because it's less visible than military might, but equally important. The Asari possess the largest economy of any citadel species, built on millennia of trade, investment, and technological development. They control massive amounts of capital, own substantial stakes in countless corporations and ventures, and have economic relationships spanning the entire galaxy. This wealth isn't just about consumption or luxury, though the Asari certainly enjoy both. It's about leverage. When the Asari have significant investment in your economy, when your businesses rely on Asari capital, when your prosperity is tied to Asari trade relationships, you naturally consider Asari interests when making decisions. It's not coercion. It's simply rational to avoid actions that would damage relationships with your most important economic partner. The Asari leverage this economic power subtly. They don't threaten sanctions or embargo. They don't need to. The mere possibility of Asari displeasure can be enough to moderate behavior. A colony world considering aggressive expansion might reconsider if it means losing Asari investment. A species contemplating military adventurism might pause if major trading relationships are at risk. The Asari rarely have to make explicit threats because everyone understands the implications. This is soft power in its purest form. Influence that operates through incentives and relationships rather than force or intimidation. It's harder to resist than military pressure because it's harder to identify or rally against. You're not defying an enemy. You're simply making economically rational decisions that happen to align with Asari preferences. Cultural influence is another vector of Asari soft power. Asari art, music, literature, and philosophy spread throughout the galaxy, not through deliberate propaganda campaigns, but through genuine appeal. Other species find Asari culture attractive, sophisticated, worth emulating. The galaxy's interconnected extranet is filled with Asari content. Universities across Citadel space teach Asari philosophy. Artists of every species reference Asari aesthetic traditions. This cultural penetration means that even species with no particular political alignment with the Asari nonetheless absorb Asari perspectives and values. When young Turians or humans or Solarians engage with media, chances are good that Asari cultural products are among the mix, subtly shaping assumptions and preferences. The Asari's long view, that capacity to plan and execute strategies across centuries, gives them an almost unfair advantage in galactic politics. While other species react to immediate crises or chase short-term gains, the Asari are playing a longer game. They can invest in projects that won't pay off for decades. They can cultivate relationships that might not prove valuable for generations. They can wait out opponents who grow impatient or distracted. This temporal advantage is as significant as any military or economic resource. It means the Asari can afford to lose short-term battles because they're confident in winning the long-term war. It means they can make seemingly irrational concessions today that position them perfectly for advantages tomorrow. And it means they can maintain strategic coherence across generations, where other species' policies lurch from one administration's priorities to the next. Consider how the Asari handled humanity's arrival on the galactic stage. Humans were aggressive, impatient, still angry about the first contact war with the Turians. They demanded a council seat almost immediately, something that, by tradition, required centuries of demonstrated responsibility. The Turians and Solarians were inclined to dismiss human demands as the overconfidence of newcomers who didn't understand how things worked. But the Asari took a different approach. They recognized that humanity, despite its youth, represented significant potential. Humans were adaptable, innovative, capable of surprisingly rapid advancement. Rather than alienate them through dismissal, the Asari chose engagement. They established strong diplomatic and economic ties with human space. They welcomed human participation in Citadel affairs even without a council seat. They positioned themselves as humanity's advocates and friends. This strategy paid dividends when the Reaper threat emerged. Commander Shepard, the human who would become the most important figure in the fight against the Reapers, developed close relationships with multiple Asari, including Liara T'Soni. These relationships proved crucial in building the alliances necessary to resist the Reaper invasion. The Asari's early investment in good relations with humanity, their patience in dealing with human demands, their willingness to see potential rather than just present capabilities, all of this created goodwill that proved invaluable when existence itself hung in the balance. It's a perfect example of the Asari Longview in action. What seemed like unnecessary accommodation in the short term became strategic advantage in the long term. But this brings us to the limitations of soft power. For all their diplomatic skill, economic leverage, and cultural influence, the Asari couldn't stop the Reapers through any of these means. You can't negotiate with an enemy that sees you as raw material for processing. You can't economically incentivize a force that doesn't value anything you can offer. You can't culturally influence an intelligence so alien that it considers organic life inherently problematic. When the Reapers came for Thessia,
All of the Asari's soft power advantages meant nothing. Their economy couldn't buy safety. Their diplomacy couldn't forge compromise. Their patience couldn't outlast an enemy that measured time in 50,000-year cycles. For the first time in millennia, the Asari faced a situation where their primary strengths were completely irrelevant. The fall of Thessia in 2186 was more than a military defeat. It was a shattering of the paradigm that had governed Asari civilization for thousands of years. The Asari had built their entire strategic philosophy around the assumption that no problem existed that couldn't be solved through patience, diplomacy, and careful application of economic and cultural influence. The Reapers proved that assumption catastrophically wrong. And in that moment, as Reaper capital ships destroyed cities that had stood for millennia, as millions died and millions more fled, the Asari soft power empire revealed its fundamental weakness. Influence doesn't stop kinetic bombardment. Cultural appeal doesn't deflect capital ship main guns. Long-term planning means nothing when the enemy is destroying everything in the present. Shadows. Elegance. Decisions continued for all their polish and apparent perfection. The Asari are deeply flawed. Their civilization, so admired by other species, is built on foundations that crack under examination. The secrets they kept, the problems they ignored, the uncomfortable truths they swept aside in favor of maintaining their carefully cultivated image. All of these came home during the Reaper War with devastating effect. To understand the Asari completely, you must look past the elegant facade and examine the shadows behind it. What you find there is a species that, for all its longevity and wisdom, remained capable of profound self-deception and moral compromise. Let's start with the pure blood stigma and what it reveals about Asari society. On the surface, the Asari's encouragement of cross-species reproduction seems progressive and enlightened. They celebrate genetic and cultural diversity. They view mating outside their species as beneficial to their continued evolution. They've built a society where children with fathers from dozens of different species are considered normal and valued. But scratch that surface and you find something darker. The stigma attached to purebloods, children born from two Asari parents, is intense and irrational. These children haven't done anything wrong. They didn't choose their parentage. Yet Asari society treats them as mistakes, as evidence of parents who made selfish and short-sighted choices. The justification that purebloods are more likely to be Ardat Yakshi has statistical validity. Genetic condition does occur more frequently among purebloods, but the actual risk increase isn't as dramatic as Asari rhetoric suggests. Most pureblood children are perfectly healthy. The blanket stigma applied to all purebloods is therefore based less on rational risk assessment and more on cultural prejudice masquerading as scientific concern. It's a way to enforce conformity, to punish deviation from approved behavior, wrapped in language about genetic health and species advancement. And it reveals something uncomfortable about Asari society. For all their claims of individual freedom and self-determination, there's tremendous pressure to conform to cultural expectations, tremendous judgment for those who choose differently. The Ardat Yakshi themselves represent another shadow. These individuals, through no fault of their own, are born with a condition that turns melding into murder. They're ticking time bombs, driven by biological compulsion to destroy anyone they become intimate with. Asari society's solution is to isolate them in monasteries, effectively imprisoning them for life to protect others. On one level, this is rational. Ardat Yakshi who remain free, like Morinth, become serial killers who rack up hundreds of victims. Society has a legitimate interest in preventing such outcomes, but on another level, it's profoundly unjust. These individuals committed no crime. They simply have the misfortune of a genetic disorder. Their life sentence is preventive detention based on what they might do, not punishment for what they've done. The existence of Ardat Yakshi also raises questions the Asari don't seem interested in addressing. This condition has existed for thousands of years. Asari medical science is advanced enough to perform genetic manipulation and create sophisticated neural interfaces. Yet there's apparently no research into curing or treating Ardat Yakshi. The monasteries aren't temporary holding facilities while scientists work on solutions. They're permanent prisons where affected individuals spend centuries in isolation. Either Asari science genuinely can't address the condition, which seems unlikely given their general capabilities, or they haven't prioritized finding solutions, which suggests a disturbing acceptance of condemning people to lifetime imprisonment for genetic conditions. Either way, it's not a flattering picture. Then there's the hidden Prothean assistance, the secret that defined Asari civilization for millennia. The beacon in the Temple of Athame wasn't just a historical artifact, it was a deliberate advantage, a cheat code that allowed the Asari to leapfrog natural technological development, and they kept it secret from everyone, even their closest allies, for thousands of years. This deception violated Citadel law, which requires reporting discovering Prothean artifacts. It violated the trust of species who believed Asari advancement was purely on merit, and it undermines much of the Asari's moral authority. Their claim to be the wise elder species guiding younger races toward enlightenment. The justifications offered for keeping the beacon secret don't hold up under scrutiny. The beacon matriarchs claimed they were protecting the knowledge, ensuring it was used responsibly, preventing it from falling into the wrong hands. But this is fundamentally paternalistic reasoning. It assumes the Asari are uniquely qualified to decide what knowledge should be shared and when. It assumes other species can't be trusted with the same information the Asari have been using for millennia. And it conveniently ignores that keeping the beacon secret served Asari interests by maintaining their technological edge. It's easy to claim altruistic motivations when those motivations align perfectly with self-interest. The revelation of the beacon during the Reaper War was devastating for Asari credibility. Species that had long admired Asari wisdom and deferred to Asari judgment suddenly had reason to question everything. Were the Asari's diplomatic skills really so exceptional? Or did they just have access to Prothean knowledge about previous cycles that informed their strategies? Was Asari technology genuinely their achievement? Or was it reverse-engineered from Prothean designs? Were the Asari's long-term plans evidence of superior insight, or just the product of having a roadmap that other species lacked? The questions multiplied, and the Asari had no good answers because the truth was uncomfortable. Yes, they'd had help. Yes, they'd leveraged that advantage. And yes, they'd kept it secret because maintaining the illusion of natural superiority served their interests. Liara's reaction to the beacon's revelation captures the betrayal many Asari felt. She dedicated her life to studying the Protheans, becoming one of the galaxy's foremost experts on the extinct civilization. Yet her own people had been hiding the most significant Prothean artifact in existence, keeping it secret even from scholars who could have revolutionized understanding of the previous cycle. Her mother, a respected matriarch, almost certainly knew about the beacon. Her entire cultural heritage, the pride she felt in Asari achievements, suddenly seemed built on lies. The intellectual and emotional devastation is visible in her reactions during the mission. This wasn't just a political scandal. It was a fundamental crack in the foundation of Asari identity. There's also the matter of cultural stagnation, something that becomes apparent when you examine Asari society critically. For a species that lives over 1,000 years, that has access to vast knowledge and experience, the Asari are remarkably conservative in certain ways. Their government structure, that electronic democracy of city-states, has remained essentially unchanged for millennia. Their social structure, the 3 stages of maiden, matron, and matriarch, has been consistent for as long as records exist. Their philosophical
frameworks, while sophisticated, don't show much evolution or challenge to fundamental assumptions. For all their longevity and accumulated wisdom, the Asari don't seem to actually change very much. This stagnation might be a natural consequence of extreme longevity. When individuals live for centuries, when institutions persist for millennia, when the matriarchs making decisions today are the same individuals who made decisions 300 years ago, change becomes much harder. There's no generational turnover to bring fresh perspectives. There's no natural replacement of old ideas with new ones. The society becomes dominated by individuals who've invested centuries in existing systems and have no personal incentive to fundamentally alter them. The Asari's long view, their greatest strategic advantage,
might also be their greatest weakness. They're so focused on long-term patterns and gradual change that they miss opportunities for necessary radical transformation. This conservatism shows up in Asari responses to the Reaper threat. Despite having access to the Prothean beacon for thousands of years, despite whatever information Vendetta and other Prothean sources might have contained about the Reapers, the Asari didn't prepare adequately for the invasion. They didn't build defenses specifically designed to counter Reaper capabilities. They didn't stockpile weapons or develop countermeasures. They didn't even seem to take the threat seriously until Reapers were literally destroying Thessia. For a species renowned for long-term planning, this failure of strategic foresight is remarkable. It suggests that for all their claims of wisdom, the Asari can be just as vulnerable to normalcy bias and denial as any other species. They didn't want to believe the Reapers were coming, so they convinced themselves that somehow, despite all evidence, the threat would be manageable through conventional means. The Asari's treatment of other species also bears examination. For all their diplomatic grace and cultural sophistication, there's an undercurrent of superiority in how they interact with others. The Asari genuinely believe they're the most advanced, most enlightened species in the galaxy. This isn't necessarily conscious arrogance. It's simply the lens through which they view reality, shaped by millennia of being the most influential Citadel species. But this subtle superiority colors their interactions in ways that can be condescending. When an Asari matriarch speaks to a human in their 30s, she's speaking to someone who, from her perspective, is barely out of infancy. The human might be highly accomplished by human standards, but the matriarch has been alive longer than human spaceflight has existed. That power differential, that massive gap in experience and lifespan, creates dynamics that can't be fully equal, no matter how much the Asari claims to respect other species. This is particularly evident in Asari attitudes toward Krogan. The Asari supported the genophage, the biological weapon that reduced Krogan fertility to the point where their population could no longer sustain itself. The justifications were pragmatic. The Krogan were out of control, expanding violently, threatening to destabilize the galaxy. Something had to be done. But the Asari's comfort with genocidal biological warfare, their willingness to condemn an entire species to slow extinction, reveals a ruthless pragmatism beneath the sophisticated exterior. When push came to shove, when their interests were threatened, the Asari were willing to support measures that would make other species recoil. The fact that it was the Solarians who actually deployed the genophage, with Taurian support, doesn't absolve the Asari of complicity. They provided political cover. They approved the decision through their council votes, and they benefited from the outcome. The Asari's military limitations also deserve scrutiny. For all the reputation of Asari commandos as exceptional individual warriors, the Asari military as a whole is relatively weak. They can't field large conventional forces. They don't maintain fleet strength comparable to the Turians. Their defense strategy relies heavily on allies,
and the assumption that their diplomatic position will prevent most conflicts from reaching the point of open warfare. This worked fine for thousands of years because the Asari's soft power was sufficient to protect their interests. But it created a fundamental vulnerability. When faced with an enemy that couldn't be negotiated with or deterred through economic pressure, the Asari had no adequate defense. Thessia fell to the Reapers not because Asari warriors lacked courage or skill, but because the Asari military simply didn't have the scale or conventional power necessary to defend against a full Reaper assault. This military weakness was a choice, not an inevitability. The Asari had millennia to build stronger conventional forces. They had the economic resources to maintain a fleet rivaling the Turians. They chose not to, preferring to invest in other areas and rely on allies for military strength. This was rational, given their strategic philosophy and the galactic situation that prevailed for thousands of years. But it left them vulnerable to exactly the kind of threat the Reapers represented. When the crisis came, when every species needed to defend itself against overwhelming force, the Asari's chosen path left them dangerously exposed. The elegant efficiency of their focused military approach became a critical weakness when the paradigm shifted. There's also the uncomfortable reality that despite all their advantages, despite the Prothean beacon, despite their longevity and accumulated wisdom, despite their cultural sophistication and economic power, the Asari didn't save the galaxy from the Reapers. That fell to others. Commander Shepard, a human who'd been alive for barely 3 decades, accomplished what Asari matriarchs with centuries of experience couldn't. The Krogan, dismissed as barbarians, provided crucial ground forces that Asari commandos couldn't match in scale. The Turians, with their rigid militarism that Asari found distasteful, held the lines that Asari couldn't. Even the Geth, synthetic intelligences the Asari had long feared, proved essential to victory. The Asari's role in defeating the Reapers, while not insignificant, wasn't the decisive leadership position they might have expected given their historical dominance. This isn't to diminish Asari contributions to the war effort. Asari warriors fought bravely. Asari resources supported the construction of the Crucible. Asari diplomats helped maintain the alliance when it threatened to fracture. But the uncomfortable truth is that the species that had positioned itself as the galaxy's wise leader, the first among equals in Citadel space, proved less essential to survival than they'd believed. Their soft power advantages became irrelevant. Their long-term planning couldn't account for an enemy that operated on 50,000-year cycles. Their cultural influence didn't stop indoctrination. And their hidden Prothean beacon, the secret advantage they'd guarded for millennia, was stolen by Cerberus before it could make a difference. The fall of Thessia marked more than the loss of a world. It marked the end of an era, the collapse of assumptions that had governed galactic civilization for thousands of years. The Asari would survive, of course. Too many had escaped. Too many lived off-world. Too much of their culture existed in forms that couldn't be destroyed by Reaper bombardment. But something fundamental had changed. The Asari's mystique of invulnerability was shattered. Their moral authority was compromised by the beacon revelation. Their strategic philosophy was proven inadequate for existential threats. the species that had shaped galactic civilization for millennia, would have to rebuild not just their homeworld, but their entire identity and role in a galaxy that had seen them fail when it mattered most. Yet even in failure and revelation, even with their flaws exposed and their secrets unveiled, the Asari remain fascinating because their contradictions are deeply human. Even though they're an alien species, they want to be wise but struggle with their own blind spots. They value freedom but enforce conformity. They preach patience but sometimes act rashly. They advocate transparency but keep crucial secrets. They're beings who live for centuries but still make mistakes that shorter-lived species might avoid. In their complexity and contradiction, in their mix of admirable qualities and serious flaws, the Asari become more relatable than they might be if they were simply the elegant, sophisticated, wise species they present themselves as. Legacy beyond a millennium. As we come to the end of this exploration into Asari civilization, it's worth reflecting on what makes them such compelling figures in the Mass Effect universe. The Asari aren't just blue-skinned aliens with biotic powers. They're a thought experiment about what intelligence might look like when it's given 1,000 years to mature. They're an exploration of how longevity changes perspective, how soft power operates on galactic scales, and how even the wisest civilizations can harbor secrets that undermine their achievements. They represent both the best of what sentient species might aspire to and the persistent flaws that no amount of time or wisdom seems to eliminate. The Asari's influence on galactic civilization cannot be overstated. They discovered the Citadel and opened it to all species rather than keeping it for themselves. They proposed the council that would govern civilized space for millennia. They established many of the diplomatic norms and political structures that define how species interact. They provided economic stability and cultural sophistication that elevated the entire galaxy. Without the Asari, the Mass Effect universe would look fundamentally different, almost certainly more violent and chaotic, with less cooperation and more destructive conflict between species. Their soft power approach, for all its limitations, created a framework where different species could coexist and even thrive together. The Asari also serve as a reminder that advancement doesn't eliminate moral complexity. They had every advantage: longevity, natural biotic abilities, Prothean guidance, economic power, diplomatic skill. Yet they still made choices that resulted in suffering. They still kept secrets that served their interests at others' expense. They still failed to prepare adequately for threats they should have anticipated. Intelligence and wisdom are valuable, but they don't guarantee good outcomes. The Asari story suggests that no matter how advanced a civilization becomes, it will still struggle with difficult choices, still make mistakes, still have to balance competing values and interests without perfect solutions. The Justicars represent one of the most interesting aspects of Asari culture because they embody the tension between absolute principle and practical necessity. Samara's story, in particular, demonstrates both the power and the limitations of rigid adherence to code.
Her 400-year hunt for Morinth shows the dedication that absolute justice requires. But her near suicide when the code demands she kill her remaining daughters shows the inhumanity that absolute systems can produce. The Asari created the Justicars because they recognized that some problems require individuals who operate beyond normal constraints. But they also recognize that such individuals are dangerous precisely because they can't be flexible. It's a nuanced exploration of justice as both necessary and potentially monstrous. The revelation of the Prothean beacon and its role in Asari development adds layers of meaning to everything the Asari achieved. On one hand, it somewhat diminishes their accomplishments. They didn't do it all themselves. They had help that others lacked. On the other hand, it raises interesting questions about what any species might achieve with similar advantages. Would humanity, given a Prothean beacon and 50,000 years of studying it, achieve similar dominance? Would the Turians? The Solarians? Or was there something specific about Asari culture, their patience and long-term thinking, that allowed them to leverage the beacon more effectively than another species might? The answer isn't clear, and that ambiguity is part of what makes the revelation interesting, rather than just a simple exposure of fraud. The Asari's relationship with other species, particularly their reproductive compatibility and the melding process, opens fascinating philosophical questions. They can mate with anyone, absorbing and incorporating diversity into their own population. This could be seen as the ultimate form of cultural integration, literally incorporating other species' traits into their own. Or it could be seen as a form of genetic colonialism, using other species as raw material for Asari reproduction, while always producing Asari children. The game doesn't take a strong position on this interpretation, leaving players to decide whether the Asari's reproductive strategy is admirably inclusive or subtly exploitative. The fall of Thessia and the consequences of the Reaper War will shape Asari civilization for centuries to come. The refugees who escaped, the billions who died, the secrets that were revealed. All of this fundamentally altered what it means to be Asari. The matriarchs who survived will spend the rest of their extremely long lives rebuilding and redefining their culture. The maidens and matrons who fought through the war will carry trauma that shapes how they approach the universe. And the children, born in the war's aftermath, will grow up in an Asari civilization that's very different from the one that existed before, less certain of its superiority, more aware of its vulnerabilities, perhaps more humble, but also more resilient for having survived existential threat. The Asari demonstrate that soft power, while effective under normal circumstances, needs to be backed by harder forms of capability when true crises emerge. Their reliance on diplomacy and economic influence worked wonderfully in a galaxy where negotiation was possible and long-term relationships mattered. It failed catastrophically against an enemy that cared for neither. This isn't a rejection of soft power as a strategy. It's a recognition that no single approach works for all situations, that comprehensive security requires multiple capabilities, and that over-specialization creates vulnerabilities, even when your specialty is incredibly effective within its domain. Looking at the Asari from a meta perspective, they serve an important role in the Mass Effect narrative. They're the established power that newer species like humanity are trying to navigate around or integrate with. They represent both the appeal and the problems of galactic civilization. They're sophisticated enough to be admired, but flawed enough to be questioned. They can be allies or obstacles, depending on the situation, and they force players to think about long-term consequences and different perspectives on time. When Liara talks about plans that will take decades to unfold, it's a reminder that not everyone operates on human timescales, that patience can be a strategic advantage, and that the universe doesn't revolve around immediate human concerns. The Asari's biotic abilities, while clearly a gameplay necessity to give them distinctive combat capabilities, also serve thematic purposes. They're literally manipulating dark energy, bending physical laws through will and training. This connects to their diplomatic approach, their preference for shaping conditions rather than using force, for changing situations through less visible means. An Asari commando doesn't just shoot enemies. She lifts them, throws them, creates barriers, warps their defenses. She changes the battlefield rather than simply operating within it. This parallels how Asari civilization approaches galactic politics, changing the game rather than just playing it better than others. As we close this exploration, it's clear that the Asari are one of the most fully realized alien species in science fiction gaming. They're not just humans with different skin color. They're beings with fundamentally different life experiences, shaped by longevity and unique biology in ways that create a genuinely alien perspective. Yet they're relatable enough that players can understand them, form relationships with them, care about their fate. Liara's journey from naive scientist to seasoned warrior and eventually to information broker demonstrates how Asari can grow and change over time. Samara's unwavering dedication to the Justicar Code shows how principles can define identity across centuries. And the Asari civilization as a whole, with all its achievements and failures, demonstrates that no species, no matter how long-lived or wise, transcends the fundamental challenges of existence. The Mass Effect universe is richer for having the Asari in it. They provide perspective on humanity's place in the galaxy, showing us both what we might aspire to and what pitfalls to avoid. They demonstrate that soft power and cultural influence can be as important as military might, but also that they're not sufficient for all challenges. They show that longevity brings wisdom, but also stagnation, that secrets can provide advantages, but also undermine legitimacy, and that even the most sophisticated civilizations can fail when faced with threats they're not equipped to handle. In their complexity, their contradictions, and their ultimately human struggles, despite their alien nature, the Asari have become one of science fiction's most memorable contributions, the gallery of imagined species. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the Blue Daughters of Thessia, into their biotic powers and their millennia of soft power, into the rigid code of the Justicars and the hidden secrets that shaped their civilization, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to Cryo Bay Logs. Your support helps me create more content like this, exploring the rich worlds of science fiction with the depth and detail they deserve. There's so much more to discover in the Mass Effect universe and countless other sci-fi settings. So many stories to examine, so many concepts to unpack. Join me next time as we continue our journey through the cosmos, one fascinating topic at a time. Until then, rest well, and may your dreams be filled with biotic blue and the whisper of ancient wisdom carried across the void of space. Good night.